Hello and welcome. This is Wilrens for Create a Learning Site, the place to go deeper in your study of the Bible. My first encounter with creative meditations in the forms of stations was in 2010 when we came to Spain to do the Leadership Development course, the LDC. On our first full day together, after an impressive welcoming breakfast, we had an hour or so to go around a number of stations that had been set up for us. And I experienced it as a powerful way to reflect, have time with God, bring closure to certain things, and enter into a new experience that laid ahead of us. The funny thing is, I cannot remember for sure what the theme was. I think it was either Bethany, the village close to Jerusalem where Jesus loved to hang out with friends, or the miraculous feeding of the multitude. Fact is, during our years with the Leadership Retreat Center, we have been part of quite a few of these meditation exercises. And I've grown to love this kind of exercise as a simple way to enhance or create a learning experience, which is what this site and this video are all about. I now try to integrate something like this into most of my lecture weeks in the SBS or the BCC, either at the beginning as a way to connect with the book, or at the end as a way to reflect, digest, and personalize the teaching of the week and think of ways to apply the book. Or I do both, the beginning and the end. It's also a great way to do a Bible study or meditation in a different setting, not a school, when it is based on a passage of Scripture, because it breaks the conventional mold of either lecturing or having a discussion. Now, why use stations? What are some of the benefits of doing this as part of a creative meditation and reflection time? Well, first of all, it's a change of pace that can break or prevent monotony. And second, everyone gets involved. Everyone gets active at the same time, and everyone has the opportunity to be actively involved in their own way, concentrating on their individual areas of need. Depending on how the meditation has been set up, several or all senses get involved, not just our eyes or our ears. And therefore, it also caters to people whose preferred learning style is not listening to a lecture. Then it's an effective way of learning, because regardless of what our preferred learning style is, we all learn and remember more effectively when we do not just hear something, but we also do something with what we're hearing. It's also a great way to get people interested in your subject or book. And as a side benefit, you actually gain some information on what they already know or not, and on how they feel about this subject. So you get information on your audience. And then it's simply a fun way to learn and a fun way to teach as well. In the remainder of this presentation, I will first present a simple pathway to prepare an exercise like this for a passage of scripture, and then I will discuss how you can do the same for a lecture week or an introduction to an entire book of the Bible. So first, a pathway for preparing a meditation on a passage. Of course, you'll have to choose your passage and study it, get acquainted with it, but then the first step would be to list your main observations. Try to formulate each point on that list in a succinct way, and shorten to the point so that it can be the basis for a station later on. In a moment, I'll show you an example of what I did based on Luke 24, the story of the two disciples on the road to Emmaus. So here are my examples from Luke 24. First, they talk about the things that have happened. Then Jesus joins them, but they do not recognize him. Then we had hoped that he was the one to redeem Israel. They are disappointed. Jesus calls them foolish and explains to them the scriptures. Then when they have entered the house and Jesus breaks the bread, then they recognize him. And in response, they return to Jerusalem to tell the others. When you have your list with main observations, try to think of a good question for each point. There may be some observations you'll have to discard because they don't lead to good personal, practical questions and applications. But where you can, try to come up with a good question. Then, if you can think of a physical object or symbol to go with the station, that's great. Doesn't need it for every station, but if you can think of one, add it to your questions, to your stations, and then try to come up with an action, something to actually do at a particular station. An action can be as simple as to pray or think about something. It can also be to do that with someone else, another participant. There's all sorts of options to do something with a mural or flip chart, large sheets of paper for writing or drawing, sculpture, something. Do something with stones, write on a stone, throw away a stone, bury a stone or another object, and so forth. Write a prayer, a psalm. There's many options here. The more diverse and the more concrete the actions are, the better. This is where your creativity needs to come out. Here are 4 examples based on 4 of the 6 main observations that I made in Luke 24. First, they talk about the things that have happened. Here's a text with an action or assignment for that first station. Based on verse 14, they were talking with each other about all these things that had happened. What is something that has happened to you recently and that has shook you or otherwise negatively impacted you? What is something you are struggling with right now? Find someone else, share your struggle, and pray together. Based on the observation that the two are disappointed, obviously they are, but they fail to recognize that Jesus is right there with them. Think of one of your own struggles or disappointments. How might Jesus be present with you in this experience? How might God be using it to accomplish good things in your life? For the third station, the observation Jesus calls them foolish and explains the scripture. As you consider your present challenge, where in the Bible is there a passage that addresses this kind of issue? If you cannot think of a Bible passage, ask God for a direct word or impression. It would be helpful here for this station to have some kind of card as a takeaway so people can write down their scripture or impression and keep it. One more example. When Jesus breaks the bread, they recognize him. It quotes the verse, "He took the bread, and their eyes were opened. Break off a piece of this bread, take it as if Jesus himself were giving it to you, and eat it. How does this affect your perception of your situation?" Obviously, this station will need a loaf of bread. For some stations, it is good to include takeaways, something that the participants can take with them as a reminder after writing their thoughts or commitment on it. Again, this is where creativity is especially asked for. Then for each station, you need a sheet with instructions. I tend to use PowerPoint because the templates offer a quick way to combine a title, a picture, and then a short text to explain what's to be done in a larger font. Be sure to include a picture for each of these sheets for every station. Then consider how you're going to place and distribute your stations in the space that's at your disposal. Possible, it may be helpful to use small tables. At times it may be possible to use a garden or other outside area and even integrate special corners or objects into your stations, like a gate or a particular tree, a neglected corner full of weeds, a composter, etc. Then you have to consider the number of participants. Can everyone be actively involved at the same time? It may be necessary to have some stations more than once, or to work in pairs, or to work in small groups even, or as an alternative, to have a meditation guide in print rather than stations. In that case, you can still have special corners and locations, but everyone will have all of the instructions and explanations in printed or even in digital form. And then be sure to finish the exercise with the time of debriefing. Ask people to share what the experience was like and what some of their highlights were. So that's the pathway when you're doing this with a Bible passage. In a moment, I'll say a few things about doing this with a book of the Bible. But first, a little promotion. When you go to the website of Creative Learning Site and sign up for the monthly email version of the blog posts, you will see a link to a Google Drive folder with examples of this for the beginning or the end of a lecture week on a particular book using creative meditation with stations. Now, if you are not preparing stations for a passage, but rather for an entire book, it is similar in many ways. especially if you're doing it for the end of a series of lectures, in that case, your creative meditation will be built on main points that are spread out throughout the book, rather than only spread out through a particular passage. Now, my experience in the School of Biblical Studies has often been that the written application that students are expected to write at the end of their work on a particular book often gets done under great time pressure and does not facilitate meaningful reflection or integration of what has been learned. Giving them time on the final morning of class truly is a gift, because there's no pressure to finish something, and the time was already reserved for class anyway. It makes space for relatively undisturbed and unpressured reflection. When you use stations at the beginning of a series of lectures on a book, and it is a little different, probably your stations will be more geared toward raising interest and finding out what people know or not about the book. For this reason, I like to work with large sheets of paper in order to collect everyone's contribution. For instance, when I teach Revelation, I like to collect on a flip chart sheet all the Old Testament references students have recognized in the book. It often stands out to me that there aren't very many, even though almost every other verse in this book contains at least something that is borrowed from the Old Testament. Here are some questions that may work well at the beginning of a book. Questions like, how does this book make you feel? What in this book appeals to you? What are important or repeated words and phrases? What is something that surprised you? What are things you don't understand? What are controversial topics in this book? What would be a great title? What clues have you found to answer a question like, who's the author? When was it written? What's the reason for writing? What or who is your favorite person or whatever in this book, and why? As you introduce the exercise, make sure that people understand what you expect them to do. For a devotional exercise or a time of application, it's probably not important to visit all the stations. People may be better off to spend their time where God truly ministers to them. It's easier if the stations can be done in any order. If not, you'll have to make that clear. Now, in terms of time, half an hour is probably the absolute minimum. More likely you'll need an hour. But of course it depends on the number and the nature of the stations. At some point during the exercise, you may want to check with people how they are getting on, time-wise, and then announce the time to finish. Be sure to have some time to debrief and to share at the end. And as mentioned before, when you go to the website of Create a Learning Site and subscribe to the monthly Create a Learning Site emails, you will receive a link to a Google Drive folder with examples for a creative meditation as part of teaching a book. I hope you enjoyed this episode, and I hope to see you next month. Bye-bye.